Night had fallen over Jerusalem like a heavy fog. As the security meeting inside the Prime Minister's residence dragged on, Netanyahu's eyes were red, and he was trying to suppress the trembling of his fingers on the table. At the other end of the table, the intelligence chief removed his glasses and handed the file to Netanyahu. There is unusual activity in Tehran. Satellite images show that the Revolutionary Guards have begun missile shipments. Netanyahu carefully examined the documents. His eyes scanned the lines and stopped at one sentence: poison letter plan. He was surprised. This plan, discussed among Khomeini's inner circle, seemed to be nothing more than a symbolic response. But intelligence suggested there was much more to it. He had to make a decision, but this time airstrikes, diplomatic pressure, or covert operations would not be enough. He could not defeat the enemy without understanding him. Netanyahu turned to his intelligence chief: send someone to Tehran, someone who can talk to them but also observe them. Who? The Prime Minister narrowed his eyes and looked into the dark corner of the room. Me? The next day, Netanyahu entered Iran secretly under diplomatic cover and was met by a former Mossad agent who had been waiting for him. This man, who had retired years ago, was now living in the back room of an antique shop. You'll only have one chance, the old agent said. If Khomeini agrees to see you, make the most of the opportunity to speak. Both of you know where this game is headed. The gray morning in Tehran began with a dazzling tension. Ali Khamenei sat in a simple room resembling a palace, carefully examining an intelligence file spread out before him. His eyes fixed on the new information: Israel's Prime Minister had entered Tehran under a false identity. The only sound in the silence was the soft tapping of his pen on the paper. Then he looked up. Bring him in, he said. Later that day, Netanyahu was secretly taken to the Religious Council building in the capital. The silence at the entrance was eerie. The echoing footsteps in the corridors made this moment, when the fiercest enemies in history had come together, feel like a sacred ceremony. When the door opened, only Ali Khamenei was inside. No guards, no other advisors. This meeting would remain between the two men. Prime Minister Netanyahu, said Khamenei, I do not underestimate your courage, but why are you here? Netanyahu paused for a few seconds. Because, as long as we are at war, our people will remain at war. We are both accustomed to death, but our children should not have to be. Khamenei's eyes narrowed slightly. Do you think this is a step toward peace, or is it just another tactic? The two peoples do not hate each other, Netanyahu said. But we are feeding their hatred. Perhaps it is time to stop. These words left the room in silence. Then Hamaney reached across the table and handed the box to Netanyahu. Then take the first step, show its contents to the Israeli parliament, then we'll talk again. Sitting quietly on the plane, Netanyahu was looking at the box in his hands. He hadn't opened it yet. He remembered the expression on Khomeini's face. It wasn't threatening, more like a warning. Upon returning to Israel, his advisors pressured him to open the box. But Netanyahu had made up his mind. He would open it alone first, then decide. The document inside the box was an old Persian text. When translated, it read, Every nation is saved not by killing its enemies, but by trying to understand them. What you do not understand will burn you again and again. At the bottom of the text was an old seal. It was an excerpt from a 16th century peace treaty. Khomeini had conveyed his message in a coded but profound way. The next morning, Netanyahu did not show the documents in his speech to parliament. Instead, he said, Farsai, Lanmaitan. At the same time, Khomeini appeared on television in Tehran. Today, I am not addressing peace, but the right enemies, he said. Our war is not with the people, but with darkness. Neither Israel nor Iran fully backed down after that day. But the language between them changed. Direct threats were replaced by indirect messages, a letter, a glance, a speech. And years later, no one could fully decipher the true meaning of the text that emerged from that box. Some believed it was a call for peace, others saw it as a harbinger of a new war. But Netanyahu placed that text in a glass case in his office. There was a single note beneath it: Understanding is the quietest path to victory. Years passed. New governments were formed in Israel, and generations changed in Iran. But that box was still sitting in Netanyahu's office, behind glass. Occasional visitors would stop in front of the mysterious box and gaze at it in wonder, but no one knew exactly what was inside. The text was never made public. One day, a young prime minister, one of Netanyahu's successors, visited the office to consult with the elderly leader. As the conversation turned to the renewed tensions with Iran, the young leader glanced at the box. "Have you ever tried to understand this letter?" he asked. Netanyahu slowly rose from his seat. He walked slowly toward the box. He wiped the glass with his hand, then shook his head slightly. "I didn't try to understand," he said. "I felt it, and sometimes, trying to understand is more important than finding a solution." The young prime minister did not fully grasp this at the time, but years later, during his own term in office, the meaning of those words echoed in his mind, because a similar letter, this time in a different box, had surfaced in Iran. A young academic working in the archives of Tehran University found a small, rusty box while cleaning the shelves. Among the documents inside was a text almost identical to the one in Israel. However, this time the seal at the bottom was different. It was the Iranian version of the same agreement. And beneath it was this note: "Without understanding the shadow, you cannot appreciate the light." This discovery sparked a quiet debate in Iran. Ali Khamenei had already passed away, but his successors were striving to understand his legacy and the messages he had left behind. The public, meanwhile, was debating a single question on social media: who was the real enemy? The United Nations has decided to convene a new security summit on the increasing digital attacks and cyber wars in the Middle East. Israel and Iran were to sit down at the same table for the first time. Two people stood out in the hall. One of Netanyahu's former advisors and an academic from Tehran University. Midway through the meeting, the academic raised his hand and took the floor. He pulled a letter from his pocket, which he claimed had been taken from the same box. "This is a text written 500 years ago, but it describes today," he said. Netanyahu's former advisor also stood up. "We have the same text," he said, joining the conversation, "but with a different seal. Perhaps the problem is not just in the texts, but in how we read them." The silence in the hall was a sign of a kind of rupture, because at that moment, everyone realized that the enemy was perhaps not outside, but inside in their minds. After the meeting, the two representatives met alone in a corridor. The academic turned to the advisor. "Do you think peace is still possible?" The advisor smiled. "Peace is not possible," he said. "But walking toward peace is possible. Perhaps it will be a walk that lasts forever, but it is still worth walking." That night, the glass box in Netanyahu's room was still glowing under the light. But this time, another note had been added beside it. It read, "Understanding is the quietest path to victory, but understanding together is the only way to shape the future."